The ballroom glittered with crystal lights and expensive laughter, the kind that echoed off marble walls and reminded people exactly where they stood in the hierarchy of wealth and power. I stood near the edge of the room, fingers curled tightly around the stem of a champagne glass I hadn't touched, my reflection fractured in the golden mirrors lining the walls. Everyone else looked like they belonged, tailored suits, diamond necklaces, confident smiles, but I felt like an intruder who had wandered into a life never meant for me. This was supposed to be my engagement party, the celebration of my future, yet from the moment I stepped inside, I could feel it. The tension, the whispers, the barely hidden smirks aimed in my direction. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. Not tonight. "Is that really him?" a woman murmured loudly behind me, her voice sharp with disbelief. "I thought the family would choose someone more suitable." Another laugh followed, soft but cruel. "Suitable, please. He doesn't even look like he belongs in this room." I kept my eyes forward, pretending not to hear, pretending my chest didn't tighten with every word. I had learned long ago that reacting only gave them what they wanted. Silence was safer. Silence was survival. My fiancé, no, my supposed fiancé, stood across the room surrounded by his friends, laughing easily, a glass raised in celebration. He didn't look at me, not once. He hadn't since we arrived. That alone told me everything I needed to know. The engagement had never been about love. I knew that. Everyone did. It was a convenient arrangement, a way for his family to polish their image and for mine to cling to relevance. I was the quiet choice, the harmless one, the one who wouldn't make trouble, the one they could look down on without consequences. Still, a small, foolish part of me had hoped tonight would be different, that he would stand beside me, that he would at least pretend. Instead, his mother approached first. She stopped in front of me, eyes sweeping over my outfit as if she were inspecting a flaw in a product she regretted buying. "You look presentable," she said after a pause. Not a compliment, never a compliment. Though I suppose there was only so much that could be done. "Thank you," I replied quietly, lowering my gaze. She leaned closer, her smile tight. "Try not to embarrass us tonight. Important people are here." As if I weren't already painfully aware. She turned away before I could respond, greeting a group of investors with warmth she had never once shown me. My fingers trembled slightly, and I finally set the untouched glass down on a passing tray. I didn't trust myself to hold it anymore. The music swelled and someone clinked a spoon against a glass, calling for attention. My fiancé stepped forward, center stage now, confident and polished. Conversations died down as all eyes turned to him. This was it, the speech, the moment where he would acknowledge me, claim me at least in name. My heart began to race despite myself. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice smooth, practiced. "It's an honor to have so many friends, partners, and respected figures here to celebrate this occasion. An occasion, not our engagement, not our future." A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd, subtle but unmistakable. I felt heat crawl up my neck. "This partnership," he continued, "represents stability, tradition, a merging of interests that will benefit both families." Still, he didn't say my name. I glanced around, suddenly aware of how many eyes flicked toward me and then away again, as if watching a quiet spectacle. I could almost hear their thoughts. "That's the one. How disappointing," he really settled. Then someone spoke up, one of his friends, emboldened by wine and the safety of numbers. "Careful," he said with a grin, loud enough for the room to hear. "You make it sound like a business deal, not an engagement." More laughter. My fiancé smiled, unbothered. "Well," he said lightly, "honesty is important, isn't it?" The laughter grew louder this time, no longer subtle, no longer kind. I felt something crack inside me, a thin line splintering through whatever fragile hope I had left. He glanced in my direction then, finally, but there was no warmth in his eyes, only distance, calculation, a silent warning not to expect more. I wanted to disappear. "Come on," another voice chimed in, a woman I barely knew but who had never hidden her dislike. "At least let him say a few words. We'd all love to hear how lucky he feels." Her gaze landed on me, sharp and mocking. The room fell quiet again, anticipation buzzing in the air. My fiancé hesitated for half a second, just long enough for me to believe, stupidly, that he might defend me. Instead, he sighed. "There's really not much to say," he said. "This engagement was arranged. We both understand that. There's no need to pretend it's something it's not." The words hit harder than any slap. A few gasps followed by whispers, then laughter, unrestrained now. I felt rooted to the spot, humiliation washing over me in waves. My hands clenched at my sides as every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet refused to move. I could barely breathe. "So honest," someone muttered, "almost cruel." "Almost." My fiancé lifted his glass again. "Let's just enjoy the evening." And just like that, the moment ended. Conversations resumed, music played, people laughed, the spectacle was over. Except it was not for me. As I stood there surrounded by people who had already decided my worth, I felt smaller than I ever had before. I didn't see him yet. I didn't know he was there. But somewhere beyond the laughter and the lights, a presence had entered the room, quiet, commanding, unseen by me, but impossible to ignore. And by the time I realized it, everything was already about to change. I escaped to the balcony the moment I could without drawing more attention, my lungs burning as if I had been holding my breath all night. The cool air hit my face, sharp and cleansing, but it did nothing to erase the echo of laughter still ringing in my ears. Below, the city glowed, glass towers, endless lights, lives moving on without noticing how utterly small I felt standing above them. I gripped the stone railing, knuckles white, finally letting my shoulders sag. This was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it had become a reminder of my place, tolerated, never chosen. "Pull yourself together," I whispered to myself. Crying would only prove them right. Behind me, the doors slid open. I stiffened, instinctively bracing for another insult, another polite cruelty disguised as concern. But the footsteps that followed were slow, measured, heavy in a way that commanded space without demanding it. The chatter from inside dulled, as if the room itself had grown quieter. "I thought you might need air." The voice was deep, calm, and unfamiliar. I turned. He stood just inside the doorway, tall enough that the light from the ballroom cut across his shoulders and left the rest of him in shadow. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't sneering either. His expression was unreadable, dark eyes studying me with a focus that made my pulse stutter. I recognized him instantly, even though we had never met. The Alpha CDO. Everyone knew him. Even those who pretended not to speak his name spoke it in whispers. He owned companies that swallowed others whole, moved markets with a single decision, and never appeared at events like this unless there was a reason. He was power given human form, controlled, distant, dangerous in the way calm predators were dangerous. My voice caught. I hadn't expected anyone to follow me, least of all him. "I'm fine." A lie, we both knew it. His gaze flicked briefly toward the ballroom behind me, where laughter spilled out again, then returned to my face. Something hardened in his eyes. "Doesn't look like it." Heat rose to my cheeks, equal parts embarrassment and instinctive awareness. Alphas like him had a presence that pressed against you, an invisible weight that made it hard to think straight. I took a small step back, putting more space between us and the doorway. "You shouldn't be here," I said quietly. "This is private." One corner of his mouth twitched, not a smile, but something close. "Nothing about that room is private." Silence stretched between us, thick but not uncomfortable. For the first time that night, no one was laughing at me. No one was watching, waiting for me to falter. He simply stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, as if he had all the time in the world. "I saw what happened," he said at last. My chest tightened. "Then you saw enough." "I saw disrespect," he corrected, "and a room full of people who forgot their manners." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Manners don't apply to people like me." His eyes sharpened. "People like you." I hesitated. Old habits urged me to minimize, to smooth things over. Unimportant ones. For the first time, something flickered openly across his face, disapproval. Not directed at me, but at the idea itself. "That's not how I see it." I stared at him, stunned. No one had ever said that to me so plainly, without an ulterior motive. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. "And I know this engagement," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "isn't what it pretends to be." My throat tightened. "It's complicated." "Most things are." His gaze softened, just a fraction. "That doesn't excuse cruelty." Before I could respond, the doors slid open again, and the sound of voices spilled onto the balcony. A few guests stepped out mid-conversation, then froze when they noticed him. Recognition dawned instantly. Faces paled, spines straightened. Whispers erupted like sparks catching dry grass. "That's him. The Alpha CEO. What is he doing here?" I felt it too, the shift in the air, the sudden reordering of importance. The same people who had mocked me moments ago now looked uncertain, cautious, eyes darting between us. My fiancé appeared in the doorway, confusion quickly turning into alarm when he saw who stood beside me. He forced a smile and stepped forward. I didn't realize we had such an esteemed guest. The Alpha CEO turned slowly, his expression cooling to something sharp and unreadable. I was invited. Of course, my fiancé said quickly. We're honored if you'd like to come inside. In a moment, his voice was calm, but it carried authority. I was in the middle of a conversation. With me. The implication hung in the air, unmistakable. I felt every eye swing toward me, disbelief etched onto faces that had dismissed me minutes earlier. My fiancé's smile faltered. I didn't know you two were acquainted, he said. We are now, the Alpha CEO replied. He shifted closer to me, not touching, but near enough that I could feel his warmth, his presence a steady shield at my side. The murmurs grew louder, confusion giving way to speculation. I could almost hear the questions forming. Why is he here? Why is he talking to him? The Alpha CEO glanced down at me. Would you like to go back inside? I hesitated. The ballroom felt like a battlefield I wasn't sure I could face again. But something in his gaze, steady, certain, made me nod. All right, I said softly. As we stepped back into the light together, the room seemed to hold its breath. Conversations died mid-sentence. Music faded into the background. People turned fully now, watching us cross the floor side by side. I didn't know why he was doing this. I didn't know what he wanted. But for the first time that night, I wasn't walking alone. The moment we stepped fully back into the ballroom, the atmosphere changed so abruptly it felt like walking into a different world. Conversations cut off mid-word. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the music seemed to dull, as if the orchestra sensed something irreversible had entered the room. I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing into my back, but for once it wasn't sharp or mocking, it was stunned. The Alpha CEO walked beside me with unhurried confidence, his stride steady, his posture relaxed in a way that made everyone else suddenly look tense and small. He didn't rush. He didn't acknowledge the stares. He simply moved forward as though this space, like every other space he entered, belonged to him by default, and somehow by proximity alone, that authority spilled over onto me. My fiancé swallowed hard. I noticed it because he always prided himself on control, on appearing untouchable. I had never seen him look uncertain before. His gaze flicked between us, calculating, reassessing, too late. Ladies and gentlemen, he said with forced brightness, lifting his glass again, let's not let a brief interruption distract us from the purpose of tonight. The Alpha CEO stopped walking. The room stilled. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto my fiancé with a calm intensity that made the hairs on my arms rise. An interruption? He repeated, voice low but perfectly clear. My fiancé's smile tightened. I only meant. You meant to continue, the Alpha CEO said, cutting him off smoothly, after humiliating your fiancé in public. A collective intake of breath swept through the guests. Someone dropped a spoon. I felt my heart slam against my ribs, equal parts fear and disbelief. No one had ever spoken to my fiancé like that before, certainly not in front of witnesses. That wasn't my intention, my fiancé said quickly. You misunderstand the situation. Do I? The Alpha CEO's gaze flicked briefly to me, then back. From where I was standing, it looked very clear. Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. I could feel the room leaning toward us, desperate for resolution, scandal, anything. This was no longer just an engagement party. It was becoming a spectacle, and not one I was the sole victim of. My fiancé laughed awkwardly. I'm sure you don't want to involve yourself in private matters. The Alpha CEO stepped closer, not aggressively, deliberately. When disrespect becomes public, he said evenly, it stops being private. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw my fiancé's mother stiffen, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene unfolding before her. She stepped forward, voice sharp. With all due respect, this is a family matter, my son. Has made his priorities very clear, the Alpha CEO interrupted, finally allowing a hint of steel into his tone. And so has this room. His eyes swept across the guests, over the ones who had laughed, the ones who had whispered, the ones who had watched in silence. People shifted uncomfortably, suddenly fascinated by their drinks or the floor. Then he did something that made my breath catch. He turned to me. The noise faded entirely, as if the world had narrowed to just the two of us. "Tell me," he said softly, "is this the future you were promised?" Every instinct screamed at me to deflect, to soften the truth, to protect the fragile balance that had always been forced upon me. I had spent my life doing exactly that. But standing there under his steady gaze, I felt something unfamiliar stir in my chest. "Courage." "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it echoed. My fiancé's face flushed. "You don't need to answer that." "I already did," I replied, surprising even myself. My voice trembled, but I didn't look away. This engagement was never about me. It was about convenience, about image. Gasps broke out openly now. The illusion they had carefully maintained was cracking, and everyone could see it. The Alpha CEO nodded once, as if confirming something he had already known. He turned back to the room. "Then allow me to be clear." He took a step forward, positioning himself fully in front of me. Not hiding me, not overshadowing me, but unmistakably aligning himself with me. "I did not attend tonight out of courtesy," he said. "I came because I was curious, and what I found was disappointing." My fiancé opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. The Alpha CEO continued, unhurried. "An engagement built on humiliation is not a partnership. It's exploitation, and I don't tolerate that, especially not towards someone under my protection." Under his protection. The word sent a jolt through me, warm and terrifying all at once. "What do you mean by that?" my fiancé demanded, anger finally breaking through his composure. The Alpha CEO turned his head slightly, just enough to look back at me. "That depends," he said calmly. "Do you still consider yourself engaged?" The question hit like a blow. I felt the room's attention sharpen, every breath held, waiting for my answer. Ending the engagement here, publicly, would burn every bridge I had left, but keeping it would mean returning to exactly what had just been laid bare. I looked at my fiancé, at the man who had watched me be mocked and had smiled, at the future that promised more of the same. Then I looked at the Alpha CEO, at the quiet certainty in his stance, the way he waited without pressuring, without demanding. "I don't," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. My fiancé's face drained of color. His mother let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said, my voice steadier now. "This engagement is over." Before anyone could react, the Alpha CEO did the unthinkable. He reached out and took my hand. The contact was brief, deliberate, undeniably intimate. A clear statement to everyone watching. Gasps erupted around us, whispers exploding into full-blown shock. The Alpha CEO lifted our joined hands slightly, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. "Then allow me to make my position clear," he said. "He's with me." The room erupted. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The words "he's with me" seemed to hang in the air, heavy and unreal, as if the room itself needed time to process what had just been declared. Then chaos followed, not loud chaos, but the kind that spread in shocked murmurs and frantic glances, reputations recalculating themselves in real time. I could feel it like a physical shift, the invisible hierarchy rewriting itself around us. My fiancé tore his hand free from his glass, knuckles white. "You can't be serious," he snapped, no longer bothering to hide his fury. "This is my engagement party." The Alpha CEO didn't even look at him. His focus remained steady, unshaken, as if my former fiancé were no more than background noise. He loosened his grip on my hand slightly, not releasing me, just enough to let me pull away if I wanted to. I didn't. That realization hit me almost as hard as the declaration itself. I should have been terrified. I should have panicked at the implications, the rumors, the consequences that would inevitably follow. Instead, I felt grounded, anchored, as if, for the first time, someone had drawn a clear line and dared the world to cross it. "This is inappropriate," my former fiancé's mother said sharply, stepping forward again, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "My son's private affairs are not yours to interfere with." The Alpha CEO finally turned his gaze toward her. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't need to be. "Public humiliation ceases to be private," he said calmly, "and engagements built on coercion rarely end well." "Coercion?" The word rippled through the crowd, igniting whispers like sparks in dry grass. I saw heads tilt. eyes narrow as people replayed the night in their minds, reinterpreting what they had seen. The laughter earlier didn't seem so harmless anymore. "This is absurd," my former fiancé said, his voice rising. "He's confused, emotional, you're taking advantage of." "Stop," the Alpha CEO's voice cut through the noise like a blade. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Authority lived in the stillness that followed, in the way even the most powerful people in the room instinctively fell silent. "You don't get to rewrite what happened," the Alpha CEO continued evenly. "You don't get to speak for him, and you certainly don't get to decide his worth." Every word landed with precision. I felt something loosen inside my chest, a tight knot I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. I took a slow breath, shoulders straightening almost on their own. Standing beside him, I felt taller, not physically, but in a way that mattered more. "You think you can just walk in here and take what you want?" my former fiancé demanded. "He's not yours." The Alpha CEO glanced down at me then, his grip firm but not possessive. "Is that what this looks like to you?" he asked quietly. I met his gaze. In it, I didn't see ownership, I saw choice. "No," I said before anyone else could speak. "It doesn't." A stunned silence followed. The room seemed to collectively lean in, hungry now, not for mockery, but for truth. "I was never something to be taken," I continued, my voice trembling but steady. "I stayed because I was told it was my duty, because I was made to believe I had no other place." I turned to my former fiancé, meeting his gaze head-on. "You never wanted me. You wanted what I represented, and tonight you made that clear." His mouth opened, but no words came out. The Alpha CEO shifted then, positioning himself just half a step in front of me, not blocking me from view, but unmistakably claiming responsibility for what came next. "This ends now," he said, "publicly, cleanly." He raised his voice just enough to carry across the room. "The engagement is dissolved, effective immediately." A sharp gasp cut through the silence. Someone whispered, "He can't do that." But he could, and everyone knew it. My former fiancé's face twisted with rage and humiliation. "You don't have the authority." "I do," the Alpha CEO replied calmly, "because any contracts tied to this arrangement pass through my companies, and as of tonight, they're void." The impact of that statement hit like a shockwave. Investors stiffened. Partners exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't just personal anymore, it was financial, strategic, dangerous. "You planned this," my former fiancé accused, voice shaking. The Alpha CEO didn't deny it. "I anticipated resistance." The honesty of it sent another ripple through the room. He turned back to me, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You don't owe anyone here anything," he said, "but if you want to leave, we leave now." The choice was mine. I scanned the room one last time. Faces that had laughed at me, pitied me, ignored me. People who had decided my value without ever asking who I was. I felt a strange calm settle over me. "I want to go," I said. He nodded once. As we turned toward the exit together, the whispers exploded behind us. My former fiancé's mother called my name, her voice sharp with panic now. "You'll regret this." I paused, glancing back over my shoulder. "No," I said quietly, "I already regret staying." Then I walked away, hand in hand with the Alpha CEO, leaving behind the shattered remains of an engagement that had never truly been mine. Outside, the night air was cool and clear. The city hummed below, indifferent and endless. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I know this was overwhelming." I let out a slow breath, heart still racing. "You didn't have to do that." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "Yes," he said, "I did." And for the first time that night, I realized this wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous and far more real. The drive away from the venue felt unreal, like I had stepped out of one life and into another without any space in between to breathe. The city lights streaked past the windows in blurred lines of gold and white, reflections sliding across the polished interior of the car. It was quiet inside. No music, no phone calls, no interruptions. Just the steady hum of the engine and the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on me all at once. Only now, away from the stares and the whispers, did my hands begin to shake. I curled my fingers into my palms, trying to ground myself, but the tremor refused to stop. My heart was still racing, every beat echoing the moment he had taken my hand, The way the room had gone silent, the look on my former fiancé's face when he realized he had lost control of the narrative. Part of me felt light, almost dizzy with relief. Another part was terrified. "You're safe," the Alpha CEO said quietly, noticing my silence. I looked at him. In the dim light of the car, his expression was calmer now, the sharp edges softened, though the authority never fully left him. He sat across from me, not crowding my space, his posture relaxed but attentive, as if he were giving me room to exist without expectation. I swallowed. "I don't understand why you did it." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out the window for a moment, the city reflected faintly in his eyes. "People like your former fiancé rely on silence," he said at last. "They thrive on the belief that no one will challenge them publicly." "That doesn't explain why me," I said softly. "You could have ignored it, everyone else did." His gaze returned to mine, steady and unflinching. "I've ignored things like that before," he admitted, "and I learned the cost of staying silent." Something in his tone told me there was more to that sentence than he was saying. A past I wasn't meant to touch. Yet. The car slowed, then turned, pulling into a private drive flanked by tall iron gates that slid open soundlessly. Beyond them stood a modern estate of glass and stone, lights glowing warmly against the dark sky. I stared, stunned. "This is your home?" I asked. "One of them," he replied simply. The car came to a stop, and a quiet efficiency followed, doors opening, staff appearing and disappearing without a word. He gestured for me to follow him inside, and I did, still moving as if in a dream. The interior was vast but understated, every detail intentional, designed to impress without ever trying too hard. "You can stay here tonight," he said as we walked. "No one will bother you." The word "stay" sent a jolt through me. Reality finally caught up, fear curling tight in my chest. "I don't want to be a burden." He stopped then, turning to face me fully. "You're not." The certainty in his voice was almost overwhelming. I hesitated. "What happens tomorrow?" He studied me for a long moment before answering. "Tomorrow, the rumors will spread. Your former fiancé will try to regain control. There will be calls, apologies that aren't real, threats disguised as concern." My stomach tightened. "And you?" "I'll handle them." The simplicity of the statement sent a strange mix of comfort and unease through me. I had spent my life managing fallout, smoothing things over, shrinking myself to avoid conflict. The idea of someone else stepping in, someone this powerful, felt foreign. "And what do you want in return?" I asked quietly. He didn't look offended. If anything, he seemed to expect the question. "Nothing tonight," he said. "Rest, tomorrow we talk." I nodded, unsure what else to do. He showed me to a room overlooking the city, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the lights like a living painting. When he turned to leave, something impulsive rose up in me, fear of being alone with my thoughts more than anything else. "Wait," I said. He paused. "Back there," I continued, voice unsteady. "When you said I was under your protection, did you mean it?" His expression softened, just slightly. "I don't say things I don't intend to honor." The door closed quietly behind him, leaving me alone. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the silence finally breaking me. Tears came then, not loud, not dramatic, but steady, unstoppable. Not just from humiliation or relief, but from exhaustion. Years of swallowing words, of being convenient, of accepting less because I was told I deserved no more. When the tears finally slowed, a new emotion took their place: resolve. The next morning came faster than I expected. Sunlight flooded the room, warm and unforgiving. My phone, which I had turned off the night before, buzzed incessantly as soon as I powered it on. Missed calls, messages, voicemails stacked on top of each other like accusations. My former fiancé's name dominated the screen. I didn't answer. Instead, a message from an unknown number appeared at the top of the list. "Come to my office when you're ready, A." No pressure, no command, just an invitation. I dressed slowly, choosing clothes that felt like me, not what anyone else expected me to wear. When I arrived at his headquarters later that morning, the building itself seemed to hum with restrained power. Staff moved with purpose, eyes flicking toward me with curiosity, but no judgment. He was waiting when I was shown in, standing by the window of his office, hands clasped behind his back. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I think I will be," I said honestly. He nodded, then gestured for me to sit. Good, because now comes the part where you decide what you want. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? He turned, meeting my gaze squarely. Last night I claimed you to stop a public injustice, but today, he paused, today I won't speak for you. The weight of his words settled over me, heavy but empowering. The world thinks you belong to me now, he continued. We can correct that, or we can use it. My pulse quickened. Use it how? A slow, knowing smile touched his lips, by making sure no one ever mocks you again. And in that moment, I realized the engagement party hadn't been the end of my humiliation. It had been the beginning of my rise. The weight of his words lingered long after the door to his office closed behind us. The world thinks you belong to me now. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a claim made in arrogance. It was a fact, one that had already begun to move pieces on a board I had never been allowed to touch before. I sat across from him, hands folded in my lap, trying to steady the storm inside my chest. I don't want revenge, I said finally. The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him. Not the kind that burns everything down. He studied me carefully, as if reassessing a strategy. That's good, he replied. Revenge is loud, temporary, power is quieter. Silence settled between us, not awkward, but thoughtful. Through the glass walls of his office, I could see the city stretched out below, endless and alive. Somewhere out there, my former fiancée was scrambling. I could imagine it clearly. Frantic calls, hurried meetings, the slow realization that the ground beneath him was no longer solid. For years, I had been the one scrambling, adapting, absorbing damage so others wouldn't have to. The shift was disorienting. What happens if I say no, I asked, to all of this? He didn't hesitate. Then I'll make a statement clarifying that I intervened as a third party. You walk away clean. Your former fiancé keeps his pride, what little of it remains. I searched his face for manipulation and found none, just honesty, choice. And if I say yes, my voice was barely above a whisper. Then we control the narrative, he said calmly. We don't lie, we don't overplay it, we simply redirect attention. By pretending to be together. By letting people believe what they already want to believe, he corrected. That I don't involve myself unless something or someone matters. The implications sent a shiver through me. This wasn't a fairy tale rescue, it was strategy, calculated, deliberate, dangerous in a different way. You'd be tying your reputation to mine, I said. Why risk that? He stepped closer, stopping just short of invading my space. Because my reputation can withstand scrutiny, he said evenly. Yours deserves protection. No one had ever spoken about me like that, as if my name carried weight, as if my future was something worth defending. I took a slow breath. How long? Long enough for the message to stick, he replied. Weeks, months if needed, you set the boundaries. Boundaries, another unfamiliar concept. I nodded slowly. All right. Something subtle shifted in his expression, not triumph, not relief, but approval, as if I had just passed a test I hadn't known I was taking. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, the story broke, first in whispers, then in headlines carefully worded to imply more than they stated outright. Alpha CEO seen leaving engagement party with former fiancé. High-profile engagement abruptly dissolved after unexpected intervention. The comments were ruthless, speculative, insatiable. My phone buzzed constantly. Messages from distant relatives who had never once defended me. Apologies from people who had laughed the night before. Invitations that felt more like attempts at proximity than genuine concern. And then there were the calls from my former fiancé. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched as his world began to tilt, contracts delayed, partnerships reconsidered, invitations quietly rescinded. It wasn't dramatic, it was surgical, the kind of consequence that didn't announce itself but left deep, irreversible marks. We met in public only when necessary. When we did, it was controlled, brief appearances measured proximity, his hand at the small of my back as cameras flashed, a quiet word in my ear when the noise grew too loud, never possessive, never performative. The first time he introduced me as someone important to me, the room went silent. I felt it then, the power he had spoken of, not borrowed, shared. But power came with cost. Late one evening, after a particularly tense charity gala, I found him alone in his office again, jacket discarded, tie loosened, the city reflected darkly behind him. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. "This wasn't supposed to be easy," I said quietly. "No," he agreed, "it never is." I hesitated, then asked the question that had been haunting me. What happens when they realize this isn't temporary? He met my gaze, then we decide if it still is. The honesty of that answer shook me more than any declaration could have. I thought of my old life, the small spaces, the careful words, the constant shrinking. And then I thought of this new one, unfolding around me with all its risks and possibilities. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something happening to me. It felt like something I could shape. And as the city lights flickered below, I understood something fundamental had changed. Not just in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself. I was no longer the one being mocked at the edge of the room. I was standing at the center of a story that was finally my own. The first real test came sooner than I expected. It arrived disguised as concern, wrapped in familiarity, and delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who had never believed he could truly lose me. I was leaving the office late one evening, the building nearly empty, when I saw him standing near the entrance, my former fiancé. No crowd, no witnesses, just the two of us and the echo of everything he thought he still owned. "You didn't answer my calls," he said, as if that were an oversight rather than a decision. I stopped a few feet away, my instinct screaming at me to turn around, to retreat to the safety of glass doors and security. But I didn't. Weeks ago, I would have. Now something steadier held me in place. "I didn't want to," I replied. The words felt strange on my tongue, simple, honest. His jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake. He gestured vaguely, bitterness seeping through. "This performance with him won't last." "It's not a performance," I said calmly. He laughed, sharp and humorless. "You really think someone like him wants you? You're convenient, a statement. Once the attention fades, so will he." The old me would have flinched, would have absorbed the insult and searched for fault in myself. Instead, I felt something unexpected rise, clarity. "You said the same thing about yourself," I said quietly, "that I should be grateful anyone wanted me at all." His expression flickered, annoyance, then anger. "I gave you everything." "You gave me permission to exist quietly," I corrected, "only when it suited you." Silence fell between us, thick and uncomfortable. For the first time, he looked uncertain, not because of the alpha CEO, but because the version of me he thought he knew was gone. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice low. "You don't walk away from people like me without consequences." I met his gaze steadily. I already did. A shadow fell across the pavement. "Is there a problem?" The Alpha CEO's voice was calm, almost bored, but the effect was immediate. My former fiancé stiffened, his confidence evaporating as if someone had flipped a switch. I hadn't even heard him approach. He stood beside me now, not touching, but close enough that his presence felt like a wall. "No," my former fiancé said quickly. "We were just talking." The Alpha CEO's gaze never left him. "That's not how it looks." I felt the difference then, not just in power, but in choice. He hadn't stepped in to rescue me. He had stepped in because I allowed him to. "I'm done talking," I said. The Alpha CEO nodded once, as if that settled everything. "Then this conversation is over." There was no threat in his tone. There didn't need to be. My former fiancé took a step back, pride warring with self-preservation, then turned and walked away without another word. As the silence closed around us, my breath finally hitched. "You didn't have to come out," I said. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." We stood there for a moment, the city humming softly around us. I realized my hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing with fear. The past had tried to pull me back and failed. Later that night, sitting across from him in the quiet of his penthouse, I finally said the words that had been building inside me for weeks. "This started as protection," I said, "but it doesn't feel like that anymore." He didn't look away. "What does it feel like?" "Like standing beside someone," I said carefully, "not behind them." A slow smile touched his lips, real this time, unguarded. "Good, because that's the only way this works." The air between us shifted, charged and fragile all at once. This wasn't an act anymore, not for me. I understood then that the real danger hadn't been the humiliation at the party or the scandal that followed. It was the possibility that I was no longer pretending. And once you stop pretending, there's no going back. The final shift didn't come with headlines or whispers. It didn't arrive in a ballroom full of judgment or under the harsh glare of cameras. It came quietly on an ordinary evening when the city outside his penthouse was wrapped in rain and the world felt small enough to finally breathe in. We were alone, standing by the window, the lights below blurred into soft gold streaks against the glass. For weeks, we had walked a careful line, public appearances measured, private conversations honest but restrained. The world still speculated, still debated whether I was a symbol, a strategy, a temporary distraction. I told myself I didn't care. But that night, I realized I did. "You've been distant," he said, not accusing, just observant. I took a slow breath, because I don't want to mistake safety for belonging. He turned to face me fully then, his attention absolute. "And do you think that's what this is?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I spent so long being chosen for convenience that I don't trust my own instincts anymore." The silence that followed was different from the ones before, expectant, heavy with possibility. He didn't rush to reassure me. He didn't offer empty promises. Instead, he did what no one else ever had. He waited. "I won't keep standing beside you," he said finally, voice low and steady, "if you believe you're here because you have nowhere else to go." My chest tightened, "And if I choose to stay?" "Then it will be because you want to," he replied. "Not because I protected you, not because the world expects it." The honesty in his words broke something open inside me. I thought back to the engagement party, the laughter, the humiliation, the moment I had wanted to disappear. I remembered how small I had felt, how convinced I was that endurance was the same as strength. And then I thought of everything that had followed, the way the world had shifted when someone finally said enough, the way my voice had stopped shaking when I used it, the way I no longer flinched when my past tried to reclaim me. "I don't want to be hidden," I said quietly. "Not again." His gaze softened, but his posture didn't change. "Then you won't be." I stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth he radiated, the calm certainty that had steadied me from the very beginning. "And I don't want to be claimed as a statement." A beat passed. "Then let me claim you as a choice," he said. The words settled deep, heavier than any declaration made in front of a crowd. This wasn't power on display. This was intention. When he reached for me this time, there was no audience, no shock value, just a hand offered openly, waiting. I took it. The bond snapped into place not with fire, but with warmth, steady, undeniable. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years, like being seen without being weighed. I didn't feel owned. I felt anchored. Outside, the rain eased, the city slowly coming back into focus. The next morning, the confirmation went public, not through scandal, but through simplicity. A single statement. No explanations, no defenses, just truth. "We are together by choice." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Support drowned out speculation. Those who had mocked me first now scrambled to align themselves with a narrative they hadn't expected. Invitations poured in, apologies followed, but they no longer held power over me. I had already moved on. At the next public event, we arrived together, not as a spectacle, but as equals. The room still went quiet, it always did, but this time the silence wasn't hungry. It was respectful. I caught sight of familiar faces, the ones who had laughed, the ones who had watched without intervening. Their expressions told a different story now. Regret, curiosity, awe. They didn't matter. What mattered was the way his hand rested lightly against my back, not to guide or control, but to remind me he was there. What mattered was the way I stood tall without forcing myself to be anything other than what I was. Someone whispered, "That's the one who was humiliated at the engagement party." Another voice replied, "That's the one the Alpha CEO chose." They were both right, but only one of those truths defined me now. Later, when the night wound down and the world's attention drifted elsewhere, he leaned in and murmured, "Do you regret it?" I smiled, small, real, unafraid. No. Because the moment he claimed me, the world learned something it should have known all along. I was never weak. I was simply waiting for someone to stand beside me, not to save me, but to see me. And once that happened, there was no mocking me again,